Civil society is quite an intriguing term, intriguing concept, because it covers an awful lot of different stakeholders and actors and agents in various diverse disciplines in international politics and elsewhere. But essentially civil society, the origin of civil society in terms of its specific trajectory, specific history, has its roots in the 17th and 18th century, particularly in Europe, but has clearly spread in different parts of the world and all around the world now as a result of globalization. It essentially is a space or a public sphere which challenges or which is separate and which makes accountable government institutions and state institutions and agents. Civil society is playing quite an important role in today's world because we're often told, and there's some truth and some validity to this concept and this idea, that the world is heading into or within a certain what we call multi-dimensional crisis. And maybe this has got something to do with the kind of post-COVID era and some of the economic issues and difficulties that we see around the world. Processes, challenges, for instance, of climate change, the various challenges of new technologies such as AI, various economic issues, various refugee crises and war and conflict. So certainly there are multi-dimensional challenges around, and this has usually been the remit of states and governments and maybe business as well. But there seems to be a movement today, and quite a healthy movement I think, in terms of the role of civil society, and a lot of interest in how can civil society in a sense respond to some of these crises. So civil society plays a role in making government accountable, but also opening up questions about relationship between the centralisation of power, the decentralisation of power, challenging some of the hierarchies in government and business, certainly in today's world of globalisation. And what civil society, or the study of civil society does, is to identify the patterns, identify the stakeholders, and some of the policies and policy patterns and connections that enable us to predict how governments are going to respond to particular issues. And this is of course very, very important for today as we see a global rise in various cultural trends towards nationalism, populism, economic protectionism. So while civil society is traditionally seen to be the remit of globalization, we are seeing challenges now to globalization, anti-globalization, deglobalization, which has certainly changed the trajectory of some of the early debates on these integration processes and regional processes. But I would argue that as a result of that, civil society becomes even more important. So Ajou University has some very interesting programs regarding civil society studies. We also have a very flexible course syllabus which allows students to focus on courses which might not usually be in their remit, but allows them to connect different issues and different courses together. Studying at Ajou University also enables students to obtain some of the cultural experiences and context of Korea itself. And of course Korea itself has a very long history in civil society, going back to the democratic processes and trends and activities of the mid to late 1980s, where Korea was very involved in the whole democratization movements towards the end of the Cold War and into the 1990s, reflecting some of the strengths of the various democratic movements, but also some of the weaknesses and some of the challenges to democracy as well. And that's very much part of the Korean experience, to not just identify what goes right with democracy, but also some of the limits of democracy as well, and to learn from that. And this is what we look at students and educate students on some of these historical processes. Korea's reputation essentially has been based on its own geography, where it's positioned between China, Japan, Russia, very strong US connections, and also more regional connections now with South Asia and Southeast Asia. So even on a geographical level, Korea is positioned in a very what we call a middle role or a bridge role. And from that perspective, Korea has its influence and impact both the regional context, but also very clearly now in many global institutions as well.